ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dennis Roberts.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Every time I get introduced and they talk about my resume, I always think they're probably thinking this guy just can't hold a job. So it's a thrill to be here today. Steve, I'm kind of wondering, in 30 years, are the folks that are here today going to remember what they were doing today? I'm not sure I will have that kind of an impact on everyone, but it's a real thrill to be here. Thank you, Steve and Amy and the entire Atlanta Aero Club for the invitation to come, for recognizing the FAA and the partnership that we have working together across this great industry we're all a part of. Today I want to kind of go through a few of the things that, some of the drivers that the FAA is working toward. We have a great administrator in Michael Horta. I know you've had Randy Babbitt, one of our former administrators, here and speak to you previously. We're thrilled to be back today. We're thrilled to have this opportunity to share what we're doing, listen to you, get feedback from all of you, and have that collaborative operation that's so critical for us. Several years ago, our administrator, Marion Blakey, had our flight plan, and that was kind of our strategic plan. Michael Horta has his 4 key strategic initiatives that we're following, and each of those initiatives encompasses a fairly large, broad breadth of activities that really affect all of us. I just want to spend a little bit of time going through those and give you some sense of some of the things we're working on, and then at the end, I want to show you a real quick video with regard to some of the activities involving our next-gen work that we're doing, really to modernize our NAS. Today, we're operating with a system that historically dates back to the 30s, 40s, and 50s when you look at our ground-based navigational and surveillance and communication systems. That system, we no longer can sustain it. It's a system that is very difficult to maintain. It's a system that's very expensive to maintain. And technology has moved so far and ahead of that that we would really be short-sighted if we didn't follow technology and be able to take advantage of that. There are 4 areas that I want to touch on: risk-based decision-making, global leadership, workforce of the future, and then finally our National Airspace System, or NAS, which is part of NextGen. The first one is risk-based decision-making. Steve was talking about the CAS, the Commercial Aviation Safety Team, and the great strides we've made to reduce the accident rate, particularly in commercial aviation. We're making great improvement on general aviation. We still have a ways to go there, but the commercial accident rate has dropped to a low that's never been felt before. In the past, we've looked pretty much back at accidents and determined what some of the causal factors of those accidents might have been. Today, we have so few accidents that we really don't have the data to go back and look back. So rather than looking backwards, we're trying to look forward. We're looking at those causal factors and those predictors, really, that could lead to an accident. We've also have tremendous amounts of data. We're getting ASIAS data. We're getting downloads from aircraft all the time that tells us how the system is operating, how the aircraft are operating. Assembling all of that data is something that we have this huge repository of data, but the key to that is how do we start processing that data? We have supercomputers at our tech center in Atlantic City that are crunching these numbers and trying to find out where that needle in the haystack is, if you will. Where's that predictor? Where is that system's failure that's starting to show the possibility that it could lead to a catastrophic accident? We're trying to identify those in advance before something possibly happens. But to do all that, we have to kind of change our mentality a little bit. Several of us have been talking earlier about we've moved from an enforcement philosophy to now a compliance philosophy. Rather than, we used to say, you know, if you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Well, that doesn't work anymore. I mean, you can't beat people into submission. If you don't change their thinking, you don't change the culture, you're going to get compliance one time, but it's going to snap back. It's like stretching a rubber band. If you don't change the culture, then people aren't going to adapt to that new thinking philosophy. That's what we're trying to do with the compliance versus enforcement. This is a challenge, however, for our flight standards people. People that have grown up in the old way of thinking. They're basically flight standards is an organization which is very reliant upon regulatory structure. They're relying upon catching someone doing something wrong, and then we've gone through an enforcement process. What we're moving toward, however, is a compliance where we help people understand what compliance looks like, and people on their own volition. We kind of say the old saying, compliance is what you do when no one's looking. How you perform whenever someone isn't watching you. How do you perform whenever you know that you're the first one to the scene of the accident if you don't comply? So we're working really a lot on that particular activity. The other thing risk-based decision is doing is it's letting us take the data and start focusing, kind of bore-sighting in on those types of things which will really change behavior. Our former COO of our air traffic organization, Hank Krakowski, when he came on board to the FAA several years ago, he looked at all these metrics the FAA had. We were testing and we were monitoring and we were measuring hundreds and hundreds of different issues and systems. Hank came in and he goes, but which of those systems are actually changing behavior? Anything that doesn't change behavior, we should get rid of. It's just data for data's sake. Some of those people that were collecting that data says, oh, wait a minute, you can't take that away. Well, why can't we? Well, that's my job. You're taking away my job. Well, that's the tough part of all this, but we need to, particularly in today's times of reducing resources, both people and money, we really have to focus on things that will turn the dial, that will actually change behavior. And that's what we're really focusing on now with regard to this risk-based decision making. We identify the risk, we identify the mitigating factors that will reduce that risk, and then we apply our resources toward that thing. So if there's something out there that we've been tracking for years, but no one has ever seen that it's changed behavior, we're saying, why do we keep doing that? And if there's one thing that a person that could come to me that can really flip my lid quickly, and I say, why are we doing it that way? Why are we doing it that way? They go, well, that's the way we've always done it. That's the first thing that I'd say, well, then we need to really take a hard look at that approach and get off of that. So that's our first one, is risk-based decision making. Second one is global leadership. Everyone in this room, it's no surprise, this is preaching really truly to the choir, that the fact that global leadership and aviation knows no boundaries. There are no boundaries to aviation. Aviation, and from my days at AOPA, Phil Boyer used to say, a mile of highway will get you a mile. A mile of runway, though, will get you the world. That's what aviation is all about. The lines are so blurred between the international community and the domestic community, particularly on the aircraft manufacturing side of the coin, that there are no real true boundaries. I'm going down to Mobile in a couple of weeks and have the pleasure of visiting the new Airbus facility down there where they do the 319s, 20s, and 21s. It's a safety meeting that they're just getting ready to roll their first airplane off the line here in about March. I think the airplane comes off in late February. It's going to be delivered March or April to their first client out of that facility. But we're doing it in conjunction with EASA as well as the National Transportation Safety Board. We're going to do a tabletop exercise to determine how, and for Airbus to show EASA and NTSB how they would operate and how they would perform in the event the unfortunate occurrence happens that one of those aircraft goes down someplace in the world. So it'll be a real good opportunity to see that operation. As Steve mentioned and Amy mentioned, that I was formerly the regional administrator up in Seattle, so had a lot of opportunities to visit with Boeing, went through the Everett plant. I was there with the administrator when they rolled the 787 out. So very familiar with that approach, but really anxious to see what's going to happen in the meeting with EASA down there, because EASA holds the type certificate even here in the United States for that aircraft for the production certificate. We have a program called the VOR MON now. The VOR MON stands for Minimum Operating Network. How many VORs do we actually need in the U.S. to be able to provide adequate coverage in the event that we lose satellite navigation? We can't rely on single source navigation. We need a secondary backup. And so the MON is the Minimum Operating Network, and we're in the process of taking some of those VORs out. You see, if you read AOPA or some of the trades and you look at our Federal Register, we have notifications that we're proposing to take certain VORs off the system. We've had banners, we've had billboards come up, we've had signs on the side of buildings that people didn't even know what a VOR was. They're painting signs on the side of barns along interstate highways, save our VOR. Well, what was that? What's that do? And they go, well, I don't know, but it sounded like a good thing to do. Anything to do with the government, we don't want them taken away. So we're working on coming up with a minimum operating network so we maintain at least the equal level of safety or increased level of safety. So we're working on those types of activities, but we're also moving very quickly toward these next-gen implementation strategies. The cornerstone, and we've just completed the nationwide deployment of a system called ERAM. That's our en route terminal or en route automation system, en route radar automation system. And this is the core computer for all of our centers around the United States. It's a system that is replacing the old host system. The first center I went into was Denver Center up in Longmont quite a number of years ago. Went into a room about 3 times the size of this room, and it was full of IBM computers, and that was the host. That was the system that was running the air traffic system for that one center. And it had all the coolers and everything, and it was controlled, elevated floors and everything. Well, then we went to the next version of it, and that's the system we've been running since the 70s. That system now has been phased out, and we've gone to ERAM, and now all that whole center computer, it would fit into about a 10 by 10 area over here. It's the power of these computing systems that we have today. So that ERAM system has been installed. It's there. It gives us tremendous capability to expand the types of services we as FAA and air traffic can provide to you as the pilot community. The next step of that is the terminal system. That's a program called TAMR. That is the same as ERAM, except it's at the terminal for the en route or for the TRACONs or the terminal approach control facilities as well as our towers. We're also going to, the third item is voice switch, which will allow controllers to, through voice activation, do automatic switching so they don't always have to dial up frequencies, they don't have to punch in the keyboard, they don't have to do a lot of the things that they've done in the past that will allow much more efficient and safer operation. The last one is Datacom. Datacom is like internet for the airplanes. We've worked with FAA has worked with industry for quite some time. This is sending this is sending data communications back and forth between the aircraft and the crews. Where this really comes into play is if we're sitting here at Atlanta, we have a front go through, they need to change the airfield from an east flow to a west flow. They have all these airplanes queued up out there anticipating an east flow. We need to go to a west flow. Right now, they have to tell every one of those crews a new clearance. They have to read the clearance to them. They have to read it back. Every time we communicate between a controller and a pilot, it's one more opportunity for a hear back, read back error. That's one more area that we could result in a mistake and create a safety issue. The thing about Datacom is that we can basically text message the crew back and forth. We still are working on the key set of data messages, but we can send those reroutes. We can do a blanket. We can push the reroute to the aircraft. The crew can look down at their flight display or at their data display and push the button accept, and immediately it can also then flow immediately into their flight management system. So you don't fat finger a procedure, you don't fat finger a different SID or a star for arrival or departure, you don't fat finger your course. Mark, you never fat fingered anything, did you? Never, okay. But that's the technology we're working on. Those are some of the things of the future that are coming. The last piece of this is where my heart and soul has been the last 6 years, and that is with performance-based navigation. This is really using satellite navigation to be able to go away from these ground-based nav-aid systems where we have Victor Airways going across different points on the ground or jet routes that go across different high-altitude VORs across the country to using Great Circle routes using satellite-based navigation. It's tremendously more efficient. It allows us a tremendous amount of increase in latitude and opportunities. We're no longer restricted to only going between different points. If weather is overlying a particular route or over a particular departure gate or arrival gate or across some en route sector of the en route environment, We're no longer restricted to those. We can do dynamic reroutes now that we can use satellite navigation. The airlines can take, in general aviation, particularly the heavy iron, can take much more advantage of high altitude winds. Just opens up the system tremendously to us. Gives us a lot more options to work with. But one of the most important things is satellite navigation is so much more efficient, it's more reliable, and it's very, very predictable. We have, I mentioned RNP, Required Navigation Performance, a minute ago. This is a system that if the aircraft and the crews are properly equipped and trained, we can go to RNP 0.1, which means 1/10 of a nautical mile either side of the designated route. That's less than a wingtip. That's a wingspan difference on a 737. RNP 0.1, that aircraft is going to be on a very, very predictable track. The controllers know if they are assigned that arrival, that departure, or that approach, they are going to be on a very predictable route. We've also added the vertical component to that. We call that the OPDs, or the Optimized Profile Descents. Today, they can come out of en route altitude. They can be at flight level 340. They can get what we call a descend via clearance from the center. They said descend via Delta 236, descend via the Eagle, Phoenix landing east. That's all they have to say. You're coming out of Albuquerque Center, you're headed to Phoenix, you're at 340, they give you that clearance. At the prescribed point, the FMS, the flight management system, will throttle back, it will tip the nose down, it will follow a prescribed descent all the way down, avoiding the step downs. Our administrator says rather than walking down the stair steps, you're sliding down the banister. That aircraft will come all the way down. ATC doesn't have to say another word to that crew until they do a handoff between Albuquerque Center and Phoenix approach. I rode jump seat one day on US Air from DCA to Phoenix, and from the time we were at 340 in Albuquerque Center until we turned off the runway and the active taxiway, 4 communications between ATC and that crew. Albuquerque Center, Phoenix TRACON, Phoenix Local, Phoenix Final, ground. That's it. 4 communications. I listened to another aircraft from another airline that wasn't GPS equipped. They did not have that capability. An older airplane flying an old GPS engine. They were talking to them all the time. I asked the FO on the airplane we were on, I go, man, they haven't talked to us in a long time. Is everything working? So he calls Albuquerque up. He says, Albuquerque Center, Cactus 342, radio check. He goes loud and clear. He says, we said, well, we hadn't heard from you for a while, just wondering if everything was okay. He goes, yeah, we're just sitting down here watching you guys. And there were 10 airplanes on that approach, and the frequency was entirely quiet. The purpose of all that discussion is the fact that every one of those lack of communication and the automation allows us to reduce that opportunity for a hear-back, read-back error. But we can't be lulled into the complacency of the fact that automation is the answer to everything. All we have to do is look back to Asiana 777 going into San Francisco. You have to be able to fly the airplane. You still have to understand how the systems are working. The last thing a pilot ever wants to hear, or you ever want to hear on a tape from an accident, is whenever the crew pushes a button on the FMS and you hear the other one say, oh, why did it do that? That's the last thing you want to hear. But you need to understand your systems, and you still need to have those basic stick and rudder skills. So the biggest challenge we have today with PBN and performance-based navigation is a really growing concern. And someone says, where am I spending most of my time? Is it in the Caribbean or is it in Tennessee? Well, I'll tell you where it is. It's in Florida. I've been in the job almost a year, and I've been to Florida 13 times within a year. And of those 13 times, in addition to going to Sun and Fun, which was really fun, about 11 of those 13 times have been down there to airports dealing with airport noise issues. The challenge that PBN does is whenever you take off out of an airport, you're under the control of ATC, and they're giving you radar vectors. Your aircraft is subject to wind drift. They're going to move you around. They're going to give you different headings to provide separation standards. But whenever you're on a performance-based navigation departure, we call those SIDs, or standard instrument departures, you're on a rail. You are literally on a rail. Your altitude climb, you're given a climb via clearance. You're on a rail. You're staying on a prescribed track. They know where that airplane's going to go on that vertical climb. That separates that aircraft from other airplanes. Where we used to have 5 miles between our en route sectors, we can bring them down to 3 miles between. So where we had 3 tracks before out of into and out of New York, we can have 5 tracks. Without reduction in safety whatsoever, we can bring those airplanes into and out of a large metropolitan area in a much more efficient as well as safe manner. What that track does, though, is it concentrates the airplanes. It concentrates the noise. And so where before we were, what a person once told me, he said, the solution to pollution is dilution. So it's like you drop that, red dye number 12 into a bucket of water and it dilutes and you don't even see it. Well, that's what we did when we would do dispersal headings. Everybody would get a little bit of the impact and of the pain. When we put these airplanes on a rail, we're compressing that track down till you have a lot of airplanes over the very same people. We're having to reassess how we manage the noise issues. Gary's here from College Park, and this is a prime example of how we've been able to work closely with the community and develop procedures that are acceptable to the community and use NextGen for our advantage. But a lot of communities they're not real happy about this, and how do we do that community outreach? How do you tell them the message about the value of aviation, the enhancement of safety, at the same time being sensitive to their environmental concerns? This is a challenge for us, honestly, and we're very concerned about this because we need your help to help us reach out to the communities. How do we engage with the communities? We need someone to help us tell the story about the value of what it is we're all trying to accomplish here through NextGen, because we cannot continue to sustain the NAS the way it is today. We have to move forward, but these challenges we're having from an environmental perspective are putting a real crimp in our ability to manage it.